This is Evangelist Henry Walker. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Maybe you're listening on my website at henrywalker.org under audio messages, or maybe you're listening at podpoint.com/Henry Walker, or maybe you're listening on my YouTube channel, New Life Revival International Henry Walker. I want to start a new message today talking about not missing your miracle. Let's go to Father in prayer first. Father, I thank you for another opportunity to minister to your people, Father. I ask you to use me just the way you want, Father. Let me say only what you want me to say, nothing more and nothing less. Help people, Father, to open up their spirits and not only receive the word, but study the word for themselves. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yahshua, by the blood of Yahshua. So again, we'll talk about not missing your miracle. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. After Acts, Romans. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. It is pre-rapture season in this last days. We don't want to miss his ministry opportunities and his blessings. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But the Father has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And the Father has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world, and things which are despised has the Father chosen, yea, and things that are not, to bring to naught things that are, so that no flesh should have praise in his presence. So you may think that the Father has a certain way that you think he's going to move, but he'll move just the opposite sometimes. He is sovereign. He's the King of Kings. He has all power. He's omnipotent, and he can move any way he wants. For example, you go back to the Gospel of John. Go to the left, the Gospel of John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In John chapter 5, the Gospel of John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, verse 1. After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Yahshua went up to Jerusalem. Now there was at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. 5 is the number of redemption, salvation. And it's no coincidence that it's in chapter 5, and the 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool, and troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in was made whole of whatever disease he had. And a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. So it really doesn't matter how long you've been suffering with something. It matters because you've had years of pain. But when the Father moves, it's over. Don't think that, well, it's been so long, will he ever do it? No, don't give up on him. His timing is impeccable. He has a timing to manifest his healing power in your life. Somebody needs to hear it right now, that he has a perfect timing to manifest that healing power in your life. And think about what you had to go through those years, not having that total healing manifested. He brought you closer to him. You had to rely on him. You didn't look to anybody to help you but him. In verse 6, when Yahshua saw him lie and knew they had been a long time in that case, he said to him, will that be made whole? And the impotent man said, I have nobody who could put me in the water. He was looking for a man. But Yahshua said unto him, rise, take up your bed and walk. And immediately the man was made whole and took up his bed and walked, and on the same day was the Sabbath. So the Father healed him in a way he didn't think he was going to get healed. See, don't try to figure out how the Father's going to move to bless you. Just let him do it his way. There's 3 ways to do what the Father wants. His way, or his way. And don't try to figure him out and plan ahead, or who he's going to use. You need some money, so you know this person has money, so I believe the Father's going to touch the Spirit to bless me. No. Let the Father use whoever he wants. He gets all the praise and the honor. Remember, we don't sit on the throne. He sits on the throne. He's that one sitting on the throne. Revelation 4:2. It's the Father in Yahshua. Go to chapter 9, John chapter 9. In verse 1, and as Yahshua passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Yahshua answered, neither has this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of the Father should be made manifest in him. I must work the works of him that sent me while it's today. The night cometh when no man shall work. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. So this is the way that the blind men or anybody around never figured that this would bring about this man's healing. Nobody even thought that that is what he would do. In verse 7, he said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way therefore and washed and came seeing. I remember I was in the Bahamas once ministering, and this little girl, her eyes were crossed, and the father just told me, spit in some dirt and put her on her eyes, and her eyes were perfect. See, it's the Father that does it. He moves in strange ways sometimes. You can never figure him out. And people questioned him how he was healed and so forth. But here's the Father that moved in a way that nobody anticipated. In John chapter 11, here's where Lazarus was sick. He died. He waited 4 days. Why did he wait 4 days? In those days, they had a custom that if the spirit of a man or a woman, a boy or girl who died, would hover over for 3 days. He wanted to get there on the 4th day, so nobody can question the miracle. And there's so much doubt around him, saying, hey, if he had only been here, he wouldn't have died, and why was he late, and so forth. But the Father's always on time. His timing is impeccable. And of course, he asked them to take away the stone, and he raised Lazarus from the dead. But people thought he was late, but he was right on time. Go with me to 2 Kings. Go to the left of 2 Kings, chapter 4. And sometimes he may ask us to do something that doesn't make sense to bring about somebody's healing or salvation. He may ask us to visit somebody who turned us down the first time about Yahshua. But go back again when the Father tells you. He just knows everything, and you just can't follow him by our 5 senses. We got to follow him in the Spirit. 2 Kings chapter 4 and verse 1. 2 Kings is right after 1 Chronicles. 2 Kings chapter 4 verse 1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant my husband is dead, and I know that thy servant did fear Yahweh, and the creditors come to take unto him my 2 sons to be bondmen. And Elisha said, What can I do for you? What's in your house? I said, I have nothing but a pot of oil. And verse 3 says, Go borrow the vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon you and upon your sons, and shalt pour out into all those vessels, and set aside that which is full. That was a strange request, but she did what the Father said to Elisha. In verse 5, so she went from him and shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, Bring me yet a vessel. They said unto her, There is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. And then she came and told Elisha, and he said, Go sell the oil, and pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. Well, I just can't figure out how the Father's going to move. In verse 8, Elisha went to shoot him, and there was a great woman there. Her and her husband always took care of him when he was there. They had a place for him to stay. And he asked his servant, What can I do for them? And he said that the husband's old and he can't have a child. The Father used Elisha to prophesy that she will have a child. And she did, and she conceived. And then the child died. And she said to her husband in verse 22, I'm going to go to Elisha and have one of the young men come with me. And she went there. In verse 26, Elisha told the servant to go run and meet her. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? And she answered, It is well. The last bit of strength she said, It is well, even though her son had died. In verse 32, and when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. And he went in therefore and shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto Yahweh. And he went up and lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. That was a strange thing that the Father asked Elisha to do, but he did it. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. See, the Father can bring a miracle in your life in a strange way. Just allow him to use whoever he wants. Do what the Father asks you to do, even though it seems to be strange. It's hard for some people that really need a healing to pray for people who need a healing even less than them. But it's important to do so. See, after you pay your tithes, you have 90% left. And you think that 90% is yours. No, everything belongs to the Father. He may ask you to help a homeless man in your offerings, or help pay somebody's rent with your offerings. Just don't limit the Father. Do what he says. See, at the wedding feast of Cana, I want to discuss that, but I want to mention to you something first. I have a message on my website about wine is a mocker. See, the Hebrew word in the Old Testament for intoxicating wine and grape juice are the same word, and same thing in the New Testament, the Greek word. So you have to read the context of what's being talked about to see if that's intoxicating wine or grape juice. And what they used to do is they squeeze the grapes, boil the juice, make it into a gel, and put that gel into a new wineskin so it wouldn't ferment. And when they wanted to drink, they would just squeeze the gel and add water. So what Yahshua did on the wedding feast of Cana, he said, fill the pots with water. He made the gel and said, now just pour the water into the pots. At those wedding feasts, it went on for days, and he wasn't going to give them something to make them more drunk. So it's important. The message is wine is a mocker on my website, henrywalker.org, on the written messages. But he's so unpredictable. He just told them, fill the pots with water, and he made the gel. Can't figure out what he's going to do. Don't even try. Just do what he says. In chapter 5, 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman was a leper. He needed to be cleansed. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to you, and thou shalt be clean. But he thought it strange. Why should I wash in the Jordan River? I got water back where I came from. But one of the servants that were with him said, hey, you come so far, why don't you do what he says? He went down into the water, and on the 7th time after he came up, he was clean, like a little child. And so it didn't make sense how the Father moved, but he followed the Father. It's not going to make any sense to you sometimes how the Father asks you to move, but do it, you're going to be blessed. And somebody else could be blessed as a result of you doing something that doesn't make sense. And he wanted to give an offering to Elisha, but in verse 16, Elisha said, no, I will receive none. In verse 18, Naaman said to him, in this thing Yahweh pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaned on my hand, when I bound myself in the house of Rimmon, Yahweh pardon thy servant in this thing. So Naaman didn't want to touch that money because he wasn't going to convert totally to Yahweh. He was still going to bow down to this Rimmon, this pagan god. So he didn't want to touch that money. See, sometimes somebody wants to give you money and say, wait a minute, they always tell me not to take that money. It's very important you be very careful, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. But do what he says. You don't know how that money came about. So Gehazi, the servant, he ran after Naaman without telling his master, Elisha. He said, hey, my master changed his mind. Can you give me some clothing and some silver? And then leprosy came on him. See, Gehazi forgot that there's still leprosy on the gold and the clothing and the silver. But Elisha did turn down that offering. If you go to 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1. Then spoke Elisha unto the woman whose son he had restored to life. That same woman we read about before. He said, you need to go away. There's going to be a famine for 7 years. And she did go away. And the king was talking to Gehazi, Elisha's servant, how the Father used Elisha to raise that boy from the dead. And as he was telling the story, the woman came in and wanted her land. A perfect timing. In verse 6, and when the king asked the woman, the Shunammite, she told him, this is so, what happened, how Gehazi had told the story. So the king appointed unto a certain officer, saying, restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, and even until now. So here, Elisha, by the power of the Spirit of the Father, told her to go away for 7 years. It didn't make sense, but there was a famine. She came back. So it was given to her everything that she would have had if there was no famine. She got blessed. She did what the Father said to Elisha. It didn't make sense, but she did it. In verse 7, then Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick, and was told to Elisha that he was sick. And Hazael, Ben-Hadad's servant, came with 40 camels full of everything good of Damascus. And we have no record that Elisha turned down this offering. See, sometimes you have to give up something to get something better. Like in Georgia, in the United States, these little peaches come up and they had to be cut off so the big ones can come. You have to give up something smaller to get something bigger. Don't try to figure them out. So we've been talking about not missing the Father's miracles by trying to figure out how He's going to do it or what you need to do. It's so beautiful that we do so little, He does so much. Remember how Moses lifted up the rod at the Red Sea and the Father opened up the Red Sea. Remember how Samson used the jawbone of an ass to kill 1,000 of the Philistines. It doesn't make sense that we do so little and He does so much. Remember Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20, all he had to do is send his praise and worship leaders out first in the battle and just sing praise Yahweh, His mercy endure forever. Nobody had to fight. The enemy killed each other. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense that we do so little and He does so much. Remember when the Father sent Elijah to the widow lady and all she had is a food for her and her son for one day and that was it. He said, give me some water and give me a little bit of the cake first. And the meal never ran out throughout the whole famine. That one day of life was so precious to her and her son, but she gave part of that food to Elijah and she had food throughout the famine. There's no famine in her house. Matter of fact, she was a widow lady, but later on, she was called the mistress of the house. Everybody in the house, whoever was there, servants, they all got fed. Remember also how it hadn't rained in so long, and Elijah sent a servant to look at the sky and said, I see a cloud of the size of a man's hand. He said, well, let's run and tell Ahab to run. And Elijah outran Ahab's chariots, and boy, the rain came down. A little cloud the size of a man's hand. Recognize how He moves. The Word talks about the early and the latter rain. The early rain may seem so small. You may get blessed. Say you believe in the Father for $5,000, and all of a sudden somebody gives you $500. That's the early rain. The latter rain is the 5,000. How you receive the early rain determines if and when you get the latter rain of the 5,000. Worship Him for $500 right now that He gave you. Sometimes it doesn't make sense that you pray for something and He gives you something great and it's not really what you want right away. Well, worship and praise Him for what He gave you. Your return, your harvest after the latter rain could depend upon how you receive that early rain blessing. Remember how Yahshua multiplied the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. It didn't make sense. But those who were hungry, they ate. Didn't make sense where the food came from, but Yahshua multiplied the food. So it doesn't make sense how He's going to move for you. I remember heard the story about these missionaries were over in Africa and they really needed food badly for the people. They're praying and this plane was moving with supplies for someplace else. And all of a sudden He turned right over them and dropped the supplies. The Father just talked to the pilot and dropped the supplies right there. So you don't know how the Father's going to move, but you know when you surrender everything to the Father, when you turn your flesh over to the Father, allow Him to mortify the deeds of your flesh, make you more and more like Yahshua, bring the fruit of the Spirit out of your life, love, joy, peace, longsuffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance, then He's going to take care of you, however He needs to move. Just don't try to figure out how He's going to move, and don't think that you have to do so much to bring that miracle about. All you have to do is just praise and worship Him, and do the little things that don't make sense. Let's go to the right to the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 8, talking about not missing the Father's blessings. We're talking about ways how the Father can move where it doesn't make sense. But just do what He says anyway. In Mark chapter 8, verse 22, and He cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto Him, besought Him to touch him. And He took the blind man by the hand, and led him out of the town. And when He had spit on his eyes, and put His hands upon him, He asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees, walking. So he didn't see perfectly. After that, He put His hands again upon his eyes, Yahshua did, and made him look up, and he was restored, and saw every man clearly. And He sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell to any in the town. So sometimes the Father will bless you one way, and you need a complete healing, but just believe that He's going to finish it. Pray again. Thank You for what You've done, Father, but can You finish the healing, I'm asking, and I believe in. See, sometimes the Father heals you in stages. Just don't try to figure out why He doesn't just make you totally healed all at once. You just can't figure it out. And also, another way some people miss the miracles is they think they have to have a lot of people with them in order to do something. Go to 1 Samuel 14 with me. Go to the left of 1 Samuel 14. 1 Samuel 14. Remember, there's the king Asa, that 1,000,000 men came against him and his army. And he said, Father, you can move by many people or by few. And as a result of his prayer and his claim and praise and worship to the Father destroyed all the Ethiopians that came against him. He didn't even have to fight. So the Father doesn't need a lot of people. He just needs somebody who's going to be totally dependent upon him. And so here, the Philistines were sharpening all the swords for the Israelites. They only had 2 swords left. So the Philistines chose that time to attack. And Jonathan, his armor bearer, said, hey, we got the 2 swords. Let's go up against the enemy. And verse 6, 1 Samuel 14, verse 6. And Jonathan said to the young man that bears armor, come, let us go over into the garrison of these uncircumcised, and maybe that Yahweh will work for us. There is no restraint to Yahweh to save by many and by few. You see, you don't need a whole army to do an assignment that the Father has chosen you to do. And his armor bearer said unto him in verse 7, do all that is in your heart, turn thee, behold, I am with you according to your heart. In verse 13, and Jonathan climbed up on his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer slew after him. And that first slaughter, in verse 14, and his armor bearer made, was about 20 men, which as it were a half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. So it's just Jonathan's armor bearer, but the Father worked with them and moved with them. They asked for a confirmation, say, if the enemy says, come on up, that means they're overconfident. But if they say, hey, stay down there, we're coming, this battle is something we want to avoid. So they killed the 20 men in that half acre. So maybe you want 20 acres. Well, take the half acre first. But you can do it all by yourself with Yahshua. Maybe he'll provide somebody else to go with you. And as a result of them taking that half acre of land, killing that 20 men, verse 15, and there was a trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison and the spoilers. They also trembled in the earthquake, and it was a very great trembling. And the watchman saw in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another, killing one another. Because 2 people stepped out in faith. You remember about David. It was just him going against Goliath. Just him. The whole Israeli army was paralyzed. And Saul, who was the tallest man in Israel, he was hiding under a tree. But David wasn't moved by what he saw. He just moved to say, this uncircumcised Philistine is trying to put a curse on my Elohim. And this is not my battle, it's his battle. And he threw one stone, and he killed the Philistine. And he actually made sure by cutting his head off. David remembered how a bear came against his flock, and he thought he killed the bear, but the bear rised up again, and he had to make sure he was dead. He remembered that when he went against Goliath. The Father doesn't need a lot. He just needs one person who would show up, and he'll show out for that person. And another way that you can miss the Father's miracles is by who you listen to. Anybody you listen to, pastor, minister, make sure that what they're saying is in the Word. And make sure that they're living what they're saying. If they're preaching against a sin that you know that they're committing, get out of that place. You need to listen to people that have more faith than you so they can pull you up. But make sure they're preaching the true Word. Make sure that they're not preaching tradition that's not in the Word. Man-made tradition. I have 2 books on my website, henrywalker.org. On the messages, the bottom of the message page, one is the Trinity Really a Mystery? Explaining the so-called mystery of the Trinity. And also I have a book called Noon, talking about the feast days, how powerful they are. And there's certain hours in the day where the Father moves the most. There's 1 hour in the day where His healing anointing is greater than any other. That's in my book Noon. Both free on my website. But make sure that what the pastor, the minister is saying up there is based on the Word. You can't say, well, I did what the pastor said, and that's why I did it, when you stand before Yahshua and being judged. No. You have to search the Word for yourselves. Like the Berean church, they search the Word daily. Search the Word. It's your salvation. You're not going to be standing up before Yahshua with your whole congregation. No, it's you alone. It's important. Listen to some of my messages. Go to my website, henrywalker.org. Look at the written messages. Yeshua was born on Passover, died on Passover. Exactly 33 years old. That message is there. Where was Yeshua born? When did he die? When did he rise? We have 2 podcasts a week. Listen, learn. See, if you need an answer from the Father, go to Him first. Don't look for a word from the Father through a prophet or a prophetess. The only thing that they are supposed to do is to confirm the word that the Father already gave you. They're not going to give you the daily news, the brand new news. No, the Father only wants to use them, if they're sold out to Him, to confirm what He already told you. So these are important, that to receive the Father's miracles, who is teaching you? Before we go on, I want to mention to you that this is a pro-life ministry. I believe that life begins at conception. The baby's heart begins to beat at around 18 days. At around 4 months, the baby's heart is pumping about 25 quarts of blood per day. And most scientists believe that life begins at conception. Here's a statement. At the moment the sperm cell of the human male meets the ovum of the female, and the union results in a fertilized egg, a zygote. And the College of Pediatricians agree that life begins at conception. So we want to pray for the unborn babies right now. Just put your hand on a computer or on a cell phone and just believe with me. Father, touch those babies in the womb. Bring them to a full birth, Father. And we give you all the praise and the honor, Father. In the mighty name of Yahshua, by the blood of Yahshua. And if any of you out there had an abortion, repent. Ask the Father to forgive you and go on and follow Him. There's some other things I want to mention to you that we've been talking about on prior podcasts that I want to remind you of. Remember, the day runs from 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. Start praying for the day sometime after 6 p.m. Get a head start on that day. And also, if your flesh is giving you some impure thoughts or worried thoughts or anxious thoughts, just say out loud, say, Yahshua, thank you that you had that crown of thorns on your head. That means my mind is protected by your blood. I only think your thoughts. Also, we taught on previous podcasts about the Sabbath. That a Sabbath is from Friday night, 6 p.m. to Saturday night, 6 p.m. And at the beginning of the week starts on Saturday at 6 p.m. The Sabbath was given before there was ever a Jew. In Genesis 2, the Father sanctified the seventh day. And He rested on that seventh day. So it's so important to spend time with Him on that Sabbath from Friday 6 p.m. to Saturday 6 p.m. when He draws you into His presence, and pray for your family. Have your own type of Sabbath that He wants you to have. There's no rule of how to have the Sabbath. Just spend time with Him. Let Him point out things during the week that you did wrong. Point out what you did right. Strengthen you for the week up ahead. It's so beautiful. In Acts 13, Paul preached to the Jews on the Sabbath in the synagogue, and the Gentiles said, preach to us the next Sabbath. And the next Sabbath, the whole city came out. Yahshua said in the last days, when the Antichrist is rising up, praise your flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath. Remember in Isaiah 66:23, Isaiah said, from one Sabbath to another Sabbath, nations will come to worship the King in Jerusalem during that 1,000-year period of time, the millennium. We'll be with Yahshua in Jerusalem. The Sabbath is the fourth commandment written with the finger of the Father. It cannot be done away with. It's just so important. If we want to go to the Father in prayer right now, just put your hand on the computer, on a cell phone. And if you don't know that you're saved, just surrender everything to the Father and follow Him. And if you have surrendered everything to the Father, just receive a miracle of miracles right now. Father, touch the people right now. Father, have surrendered everything to you. Father, touch them from the top of their heads to the soles of their feet. Make them whole, Father. Keep them whole. And wherever else they need a miracle, Father, I'm asking you to do it. They surrendered everything to you, Father. And strengthen us all, Father. Everybody in the remnant. Strengthen us for this final push, these final days, this rapture season, this pre-rapture season. And Father, we give you all the praise and the honor, Father, in the mighty name of Yahshua, by the blood of Yahshua. And if you enjoy these podcasts, tell other people about these podcasts, share, and remember to next time. This is Evangelist Henry Walker saying, greater is the Father in you, your daddy, the King of the universe, than he that is in the world.